Danger Zone.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Kev Baker Show with me, your host, Kev Baker, and I am your host for the next 2 hours of live radio right here on Truth Frequency Radio, tfrlive.com. Big shout out to everyone who's tuned in tonight. Hope you're having a wonderful day, and hopefully myself and my good friend and my special guest tonight, Mr. Anthony Patch, can leave you all the wiser 2 hours from now. Well, that's the plan anyway. And of course, coming up in hour number 2 of the show, we've got our good friend, the man himself, Johnny Whistles. So if you want to check out Anthony Patch's work, you can go to his website over at anthonypatch.com. He's a man that I think really needs no introduction, but if you haven't heard of him before, he's an author, researcher, public speaker, host right here on tfrlive.com. And of course, he has wrote a number of books, including Covert Catastrophe, 2048, Diamonds in the Rough, Revising Reality. He's the man and the brains behind Entangled, E-Magazine. And like I say, he is here with us tonight. So Tony, again, welcome back, brother.
Always great to be with you, Kev. And we got a lot to cover. We're going to talk about Irma. We have to. That's the big news all around the world today.
It really is, and I would love to be able to talk about something else, but what we're seeing right now with this storm, in my opinion anyway, it's totally unprecedented. I was watching the Twitter feed earlier on. It's a really good way to watch news. As it's breaking, just use the hashtags, look for what's trending, and I tell you, Tony, some of the footage that I was seeing coming in from some of these outlying islands in the British Virgin Islands and places like that, and this was before the eye had even hit, it was utterly horrendous. And to say that this is going to be devastating as it makes its way towards the US, it's a bit of an understatement, Tony, isn't it?
It really is. We don't really know what's going to happen when this Category 5 hits Florida. It's obvious that the eye is going to track either up the middle, to the west, off to the left, if you will, or to the right on the eastern side and then continue up the eastern seaboard. But that isn't the big deal. I mean, everybody's focused on the tracking to try to predict where it's going to go, over the course of this entire storm event. But people need to keep in mind that the highest winds are radiating out from the eye to as far as 50 miles in diameter. And then, of course, you have, tropical storm winds beyond that 50 mile, but the hurricane winds themselves extend 50 miles out from a very clearly defined eye. And I shared with you off the air something about that eye. Do you want to cover that?
No, I'm going to let you explain that, Tony, yeah, because this was really interesting. And I'd been saying to you how seeing this from satellite images, it looks utterly amazing. And I don't mean that in a bad way. And then when you were adding to that somebody's experience of actually flying into this, I think this is actually quite critical information. I don't know what it means, but there's something to it.
Yeah, the Weather Channel last night interviewed the flight director from one of the storm chaser aircraft that actually penetrates to the eye of hurricanes. And he was indicating that he had never seen in his years of storm chasing, and I don't mean the guys on the ground, I'm talking about a 4-engine propeller turboprop aircraft, and he described the wall as being a double wall, that there is a concentric circle of walls. So they flew through the first one and then immediately penetrated through a second one into the eye. So they were within a separate ring of a separate wall, and that it was the most clearly defined walls he had ever seen and the tallest. And then he remarked also, that you can clearly see the ocean below and the blue sky above. Truly it's a surreal kind of a setting to be in the eye of a hurricane like that, I would imagine. But again, double wall eye. This is truly a strange storm.
It really is. And, the TFR family. We've got a Skype chat here, and our very own Phoenix Rising Radio, he sent this update from a French journalist in St. Martin, and they were saying that it's a nightmare. No power, no water, no internet, scenes of looting. We've got boats have sunk, roads closed, a fire in the Mercure Hotel, state buildings and fire building destroyed, and at least 3 dead there. Now, that's unconfirmed, those numbers, but I believe this storm right now, Tony, it's heading for Puerto Rico next. And, you know, if the eye of the storm travels over somewhere like Puerto Rico, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I believe there's a couple of million people live there, I mean, this is going to be a humanitarian crisis waiting to happen.
Yeah, it already is. We never really hear much from the Leeward Islands in terms of reporting. I don't think they want to risk their people, as you had said to me before we came on the air. They don't want to risk their reporters, and I don't blame them. But the eye will travel just north over the islands themselves. So just north of Puerto Rico and then just north of Cuba is the consistency or the combined tracking models that they're putting out right now, with the eye heading straight for the tip of Florida. It's hard to say if it's going to go left or right, like we said a moment ago, but it is almost irrelevant whether the eye goes right over the islands directly itself, because, again, we're looking at 50 miles from the eye, and that certainly the eyes will be right along the edge of the islands themselves.
Now, this is going to be a night of breaking news here, potentially, but again, coming from Phoenix, and I can't verify this sitting here right now, but it says breaking news, and it's coming from the island of Barbuda, and it's pretty terrible news that this whole island might well have been wiped out. They're saying that 1,000 people may have been killed. This comes from somebody called Lauren Dobson Hughes. It looks like Twitter, by the looks of it, says, hosts acknowledged the PM's statements previously was false, but Barbuda has been, quote, been wiped out, and I feel teary. The PM was close to tears, and it says that Barbuda is totally demolished. Over 90% of structures and roads have gone. And like I say, we can't confirm that right now, but Tony, when you see some of these outlying islands and things, and you hear about the storm surge that's coming on top of these 185 mile per hour winds, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised if there's more reports like this come in over the hours.
Yeah, it could well be that in these smaller leeward islands that they may have the highest death tolls because of the structures and the relative low elevation of the islands to begin with, that they would literally be overrun. They were talking about with Florida along the shoreline to expect 12-foot tidal surge. And that doesn't even include the winds. That's just the water being pushed by the leading edge of the storm and it piling up on the shoreline 12 feet high. You can imagine what it must be like to literally have the eye overrunning the island itself and carrying first the leading edge and then the trailing edge. And typically the trailing edge is more powerful.
It really is. And I was looking today and trying to find the name of these islands here, but they were explaining how most of the flood surge and the water actually goes to the northwest quadrant. And there's islands up in the northwest of, or they're north of Puerto Rico and Cuba, and they're saying these will be the most affected by this. And they're even saying up to 6 meters of a storm surge. So this is definitely something we're going to have to keep our eye on. But over the course of doing both our shows, Tony, we've had the pleasure of working with some really brilliant researchers. And one of the best when it comes to geoengineering and all things weather has to be our good friend Dane Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.org. And he put out a video regarding Hurricane Irma, and it's entitled Hurricane Irma Manipulation, the Objectives and the Agenda. And what I'm going to do for the audience right now is we're going to sit and we're going to listen to Dane Wigington talking about all of this and going over the historics of geoengineering and weather weapons. Take a listen to this.
Many ask why the government, our own government, would modify the weather in a way that does immense harm to our own citizens and to the life support systems of the planet as a whole. And without doing any investigative research whatsoever, many choose to completely deny that climate modification could be real and ongoing, with many potential objectives and agendas being carried out in what can only be considered programs of weather and biological warfare. The U.S. government and the U.S. military have been fully involved in not just weather modification, but hurricane modification for at least 70 years. Project Cirrus was underway 70 years ago. With only 80 kilograms of dry ice, profound manipulation of a hurricane was achieved. How much more effectively can the weather makers now manipulate hurricanes when they have the air power to dump hundreds of tons of patented materials into such storms? The historical document shown here is for Project Storm Fury, which was historically a part of the ongoing and expanding U.S. government and U.S. military hurricane manipulation programs. One of the crews and aircraft of Project Storm Fury is shown here, a U.S. military hurricane manipulation project and program. It's important to remember that the fully documented weather warfare was already going on by the Vietnam War with Project Popeye, which created catastrophic and continuous flooding over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This document excerpt was taken from a 750-page U.S. Senate report that was produced in 1977. The document's extremely damning and can be reviewed in its entirety on geoengineeringwatch.org by simply searching Geoengineering Watch Massive Senate Document. Geoengineeringwatch.org was the original source that found and posted this report. The yellow highlights in the page excerpts are ours. This document and countless others prove beyond doubt that the U.S. government and U.S. military programs of climate and hurricane manipulation were real, ongoing, and rapidly expanding. This U.S. government document outlining the need for global governance of climate engineering is just one more of many. The active involvement of the U.S. government and military in ongoing climate engineering operations is absolutely undeniable. This is an example of one hurricane suppression patent. And though this information is available to the public, there are likely many more processes of hurricane suppression and manipulation that are considered classified. This excerpt from a scientific study on cyclone suppression is very important to consider. The red highlighted statements are key. The report states that when tropical cyclones are saturated with aerosols, the intensity is reduced, the flow of energy from warming oceans is reduced, and the winds weaken. Now let's consider this. How can atmospheric aerosols be widely dispersed? In addition to the use of military tanker jets for atmospheric aerosol spraying, retrofit aerosol spraying nozzles have been mounted on many commercial carrier aircraft and are being utilized. These nozzles are aimed directly into the exhaust jet stream in order to enforce the completely false official narrative that we're only seeing condensation trails, when in fact, we're seeing sprayed aerosol dispersions. Available data indicates commercial carrier personnel are not directly involved with the climate engineering programs, though these aircraft are absolutely being used. Aerosol dispersions over the oceans are now constant and blatant. This photo shows the Eastern Pacific and clearly reveals aerosol spraying activity. The vast majority of populations have absolutely no idea that the ongoing global climate engineering Manhattan Project is tearing the climate and life support systems of the planet apart. The toxic heavy metal and chemical aerosols are also contaminating our breathable air column and the entire biosphere as a whole. How can aerosols and radio frequency microwave transmissions impact the formation of hurricanes? This NASA satellite image is very revealing. The image was taken off the west coast of Africa, a primary location where Atlantic hurricanes form. The manipulation of the tropical cyclone formation region is extremely alarming and undeniable. Radio frequency microwave transmissions manipulate the electrically conductive heavy metal nanoparticulates that have been seeded into the atmosphere in the cloud formations. The manipulation of these particulates in turn manipulates air masses and thus storm formations. The climate engineers have been aggressively suppressing and or redirecting Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico hurricanes for over 12 years. There's been no major hurricane impact for a record 12 years. On this point, please hear all the details I'm reporting. I didn't say there's been no hurricane impacts for 12 years. There have been no major hurricane category landfalls in the last 12 years in the U.S. Though some might conclude that cyclone suppression is good, any such intervention with Earth's life support and cooling systems is an extremely detrimental practice in regard to the life support systems of the planet as a whole. Our rapidly warming oceans are trying to spawn cyclones, but the weather makers have long since achieved the ability to decide what develops, what doesn't, and what direction it travels. And who gave the military-industrial complex the right to play God with Earth's climate and life support systems? This climate scenario that this image represents is extremely alarming. It's directly related to Hurricane Irma. This is the NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, departure from normal temperature forecast map. Or more accurately, this is the scheduled weather, since Raytheon, geoengineering contractor Raytheon, does all the modeling for NOAA and the National Weather Service. This map is for September 7th through the 11th, 2017. And this map reflects one of the most shocking temperature imbalances yet recorded in the lower 48 states and reveals one of the primary agendas behind Hurricane Irma: to keep the most populated zones of the eastern U.S. cooled down by delivering abundant moisture from Hurricane Irma into the eastern U.S. This moisture will be scattered inland and utilized for chemical ice nucleation processes. These are patented processes. The center of the red zones in the west may be as much as 30 degrees above normal. Record-shattering temperatures continue constantly in the west as it fries under a climate-engineered, ionosphere heater-induced dome of high pressure, the, quote, ridiculously resilient ridge, part of the overall climate engineering scenario. Some of the blue highlighted zones in the U.S. East may be as much as 30 degrees below normal. The moisture from Hurricane Harvey was used for the same purpose, to keep the same predetermined zones temporarily cooled down while the planet as a whole continues to superheat. The moisture from Hurricane Irma will be used for the same. Welcome to our geoengineered world. This GISS, departure from normal temperatures, image documents the record of overall planetary surface warming from 2013 to 2016. The profound warming in the U.S. West and the near absence of overall warming in the eastern U.S. is further confirmation of the completely engineered and ongoing scenario just described in the previous NOAA image of extreme U.S. temperature imbalances. While the world continues to free fall into abrupt climate shift, geoengineered cooldowns with highly toxic chemical ice nucleating elements have helped the world's largest military to keep the most population-dense regions in the U.S. from feeling the full impact of what's unfolding. This is the psychological aspect of climate engineering, keeping populations confused, divided, and in many cases pacified in regard to the true state of the unfolding global climate and environmental collapse until the last possible moment. The paradox is this: climate engineering is the single greatest climate disrupting and environmentally destructive assault ever launched by the human race. And considering the degree of anthropogenic damage to the planet on countless fronts, that's saying a lot. How dire is the threat we collectively face from the unfolding climate and biosphere collapse? Far worse and far more immediate than almost any yet comprehend. Even though record numbers of cyclones have been occurring in other parts of the world with record intensity, hitting nations such as the Philippines over and over, nations that are no longer willing to comply with U.S. occupation and control. As already shown, U.S. major cyclone impacts have been suppressed for over 12 years. What has changed and why? We must consider and remember this. Since all available climate data proves the climate engineers possess the processes and resources to suppress and or redirect hurricanes, if the weather makers didn't want Hurricane Harvey to happen how it did or where it did, it would not have happened. If the weather makers wanted to completely suppress Hurricane Irma, to diminish or dissipate it, or to steer it out to sea, they could. Again, available historical data proves this fact. Why the change of course and strategy for the climate engineers? Though the U.S. population has been subjected to weather warfare for decades, it's now become unimaginably blatant and aggressive in lockstep with the growing power structure desperation. Everything's changing on countless fronts, and this must be remembered and considered always. We mustn't think dichotomously with the this or that mindset. The power structure has a great many agendas, everything they do carries complex implications and motives. This is most true in regard to the climate engineering assault. Populations are waking up to the power structure cancer and their crimes. Disasters like that just caused by Hurricane Harvey and what's likely coming from Irma serve many agendas for the global elite. In the case of Harvey, there were and are oil prices and production to consider, potentially increased economic activity due to the need to fix the disaster, the creation of mass distraction while the power structure pushes toward World War III, the potential disabling of populations, thus rendering them unable to stand up to government tyranny, the opportunity to move the military into place in preparation for already unfolding and inevitable societal collapse. But again, there are other climate engineering objectives related to even more dire factors that far too few are paying any attention to. Our biosphere is imploding. We're already in a runaway climate shift scenario heading toward a mathematically certain near-term global omnicide if we remain on the current course. The climate engineers will do anything they can and everything they can at any cost to the web of life to hide this fact from populations. In their attempt to postpone public panic for as long as possible, and thus to keep the military-industrial complex in full control, it would seem the power structure is willing to exterminate life on Earth. Make your voice heard in the critical battle to sound the alarm. Share credible and compelling informational materials, which can be found on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Make your voice heard while it still matters. This is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.
And a massive, huge thank you there to Dane Wigington, who gave us permission not only to play that tonight, but to post that to both of our YouTube channels. And that's how imperative both myself and Anthony feel the message is. That's why we've both reposted that. And Tony, when you listen to Dane laying it out like that, I mean, he goes over the historics of everything, and it's compelling listening. But I mean, here we are, all the kind of mainstream fake news talking about how climate change is causing this. And they say it's man-made climate change. And in a way it is. Not the way they explain it, but this is man-made as in military and government climate change that we're living in now.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, Dane is a very credible researcher. He is an engineer. He's been doing this, I think, for 20 years that I've been listening to him, I believe. It's got to be, 15 years at least that I know right off the top of my head when I first started following his research. You and I, over the course of the last week or even more, have been kind of reticent about or reluctant to, get into talking about perhaps this is a man-made event, both Texas and now Florida. But I think we can just let Dane, who's an excellent researcher in this area, because I'm not, speak for you and me. And I think you would agree with that.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And, we often talk about weather weapons and people will ridicule us, stuff like that. But now on InfoWars today, I was reading this and it makes me shake my head, because these people that are against Donald Trump, well, they are literally now blaming him for possibly creating this storm. Maybe even he has a machine that can do it. And these are the same people that would have laughed at us anytime we had mentioned HARP in the past. But it says here that Trump derangement syndrome has worsened to the point where hysterical haters of the president are now seriously claiming that Trump is responsible for creating, quote, racist hurricanes. That's right. And one of the Twitter kind of posters here says, I can't believe Trump's sexist and racist head ass is letting Irma and Jose run a hurricane train on America. And then somebody called Daryl Bernardo says, is it possible that Trump has a hurricane making machine that pushes the news off his racist decisions, Tony?
Yeah, I mean, they can politicize anything they want, and so can we. We can talk about the previous administration in the United States. It isn't necessary to bring the politics in, but they're going to, because they want to take everything. I mean, even in the midst of the hurricanes, they're still talking about what I would call Russiagate, as far as the president having been involved with Russia to throw the election and all that. They're still talking about that while people are being killed and made homeless by these storms. That is cruelty, outright cruelty, to just focus on pure nonsense about the president.
Absolutely. And as they cold and callously say, they never let a crisis go to waste. We'll be back after the break, ladies and gentlemen. Don't go anywhere.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
We are back. I'm Kev Baker, and this is, of course, the Kev Baker Show, right here on the only network that counts, Truth Frequency Radio, TFRlive.com. I'm joined tonight by Anthony Patch. He joins me every Monday and Wednesday right here on KBS. And then on a Friday, at the same time, I jump onto Tony's show, the Anthony Patch Show, as his co-host. It's amazing how we do this. It really is. And we've always got so much to talk about. And that has never been truer than tonight's show, with everything that is going on with Hurricane Irma. Now, we often like to say, Tony, we're going to fly to 30,000 feet. We're going to look at this from all kind of different perspectives. And I've noticed a couple of times now, I've seen people, and they're quite right to throw this out there, because with the kind of geopolitical position that we're in the world right now, reference North Korea, Little Kim, as I like to call him, then we've got Hurricane Irma, and then behind that you've got Hurricane Jose, and then also in the Gulf of Mexico you've got Tropical Storm Katia. And there are people saying, how about North Korea possibly using their own weather weapons? What a brilliant way for them to actually attack the US. He did say he'd be sending, air quotes, packages their way sometime soon. I mean, could this be what we're seeing, Tony? And before you answer that, me personally, I had a look today. I tried to Google ionospheric heaters and looked at the map, see if I could find any in North Korea. But North Korea being North Korea, it's hard to find anything in there. And I would surmise, with North Korea typically being the puppet of Beijing and China, if anything like that was being done, Tony, and I'm not sure if it is, but if there was any geoengineering attacks going on, I would look more to Kim's handlers in China, perhaps, because they most definitely have this technology. But what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you. It'll be more likely China, and I will discount Russia from the equation as well. Russia really, in my estimation, is trying to be an ally with us. As much as people want to paint Russia as being the enemy, their economy is, it's only about as big as, what was the comparison I heard? I think it was equivalent to New York State. But anyway, it's a small economy. It's a large country, but economically, they're not a real powerhouse. Certainly, they have a strong military. But the issue is, who would be more likely to be angry with the United States? And I think that falls to China. But we also have to overlay that whole thing, as you say, at 30,000 foot perspective on things. We have to understand that it's a globalist agenda. It is not a sovereign nation against sovereign nation agenda. And it's not even a Donald Trump-driven agenda. Sorry, left-wing Hillary lovers and all the others out there. But as we were sort of before the break politicizing a little bit, the issue here is, from Dane Wigington's research, and I would agree with his research, these are weather weapons that are being used. Who are they being used by? I'm just going to say it's the globalists. It's the only way you can really point a finger at anybody, over and above even China themselves. But we're going to talk a little bit more about North Korea in a different direction. But go ahead, my friend.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, me personally, I think we're going to see a lot more of these Category 5 storms. And it is climate change. And like I was saying before the break, it's military and governmental and the cabal climate change, because year upon year of geoengineering has changed our climate. They've changed the stratosphere. They've changed everything with all of their spraying. There's not one part of this planet that hasn't been affected by now. And I think this is just a culmination of things, Anthony. And you were describing it, or you heard an analyst talking about the perfect storm when they were talking about Irma. And I think right now, with the whole of the kind of atmospheric conditions and everything they've had going on, it's creating the conditions for lots of these perfect storms.
It is. And the Hurricane Hunter flight director is who was describing, the wall of the storm and the height and the view from inside in the eye wall and in that environment. And we have another analyst that we're going to talk about right now relative to North Korea. And this is a gentleman, I hope I get his name right, but it's Harry, I think it is Katsianis, Katsianis. He's from the Center for National Interests, and that would be the United States interest. And he was indicating last night in his analysis of North Korea in the question of what are the capabilities and why? In other words, why would Kim be doing this? And his analysis as to why was simply that he was trying to maintain his own political power base, that he is at a point now where he has to continue looking as if he's a strong leader. Obviously, he's a dictator to his own people and his own generals, and perhaps the world, and perhaps even to China. Maybe China is pulling his strings and orchestrating all of this bluster that he's putting out. But the analysis that really struck me, the comment that he said, was that he does expect another ICBM missile launch test over Japanese waters. But this time, perhaps, he said, perhaps from the analyst information that he has, I should say more specifically the intelligence information that he has from inside North Korea, and this comes from South Korean agents that are working in North Korea, they believe the next test will drop that ICBM warhead, whether it has a nuke on it or not, they don't know. But the warhead container would drop just off the coast of California.
Wow. Now, that's definitely something to think about. And I've been thinking a lot about North Korea lately. And it almost sounds like I'm sticking up for little Kim here, Tony, but please, nobody think that. However, let's bear in mind everything that we know about this reclusive hermit state comes to us mainly from who? Well, it comes to us from a lying mainstream media. Now, we can look back to the Iraq war, where in Britain here, we had the sexed up document on WMD. We were told we were going to be killed within 45 minutes of him launching. We know how that panned out. That was a total lie. We've seen they lied about so many other things to do with Saddam as well. And then even more recently, Colonel Gaddafi. What a bad guy he was, eh? Only he wasn't that bad when we found out the truth about him. And all of our opinions were based on what? What we were told from the mainstream media, who we always tell people to question. And that's why when it comes to North Korea, Tony, I'm not sitting on the fence with them or anything, but everything that I think I believe about that place, I'm now questioning. Because it's coming to me from these media cats, and it's all propaganda. Now, for what reason, I don't know. And I'm not saying it's all sunshine and flowers and everyone's having 5 square meals a day over there. Certainly not. But are we truly getting the true picture of little Kim? Have we ever heard him directly saying into a camera he's coming to attack America? It's all stuff we have to keep an open mind on, Tony.
I agree with you. I think we always try to be open-minded. We try to be pragmatic, and we try to be empirical in terms of testing the sources and testing the data that we read, even from mainstream science. I mean, so we apply that in the scientific as well as the realm of the media. So I'm right there with you. We don't have access to the intelligence agencies, and I'm going to step back again. Let's go to 30,000 feet. Let's talk about the intelligence agencies, because I want to reiterate to you guys, I know you listen to the show all the time. You have, Kev, a couple of guys assigned to you, and there's a couple of guys assigned to me. So we're talking to you guys, and that is, we are not your enemy. Got it? We applaud your efforts. Sorry, Kev. We applaud your efforts to protect the United States of America and innocent people around the world. Go for it, guys. And we're not your enemy. Just get off our backs. Go ahead, Kev.
Absolutely. There's more important things to be doing than interfering with Patch and Baker. But, you know, if I was kind of brainstorming how this is going to go down, Anthony, I mean, we had Donald Trump coming out today, said he had a very pleasant phone call with President Xi of China, that China are going to try and do something, Donald Trump says. But I think when the end game on this plays out, I think we're going to see some special forces, maybe some agents who are already in North Korea, some very, very targeted strikes on installations, guerrilla style in there, bomb it out. I don't think we're going to see any major kind of nuclear conflict or any nuclear strike coming from Trump. I don't know. I've just got a feeling that isn't going to be it. It's going to be something surgical, but that's just my take on this. And I do think they've crossed that line. When you hear Trump's rhetoric, I mean, the military is looking like the only option, because what do you negotiate with this madman? I mean, what do you really give him? He doesn't care about all the sanctions against him. I think it's going to result in something like that.
Yeah, I'll play general. I'll play commander-in-chief for a moment. We all like to be the armchair quarterback before the event, during the event, and post-event. So here's what I would do. I would continue to move my clandestine operatives, my special operations guys, into North Korea, along with South Korean special forces operatives, and move in and execute a regime change. And I choose my words carefully. The regime change needs to take place. If there is a sign that they're going to launch another test ICBM, will we know that it has a warhead on board or not? Not necessarily. But if there are signs that they're preparing to launch, I do believe that Donald Trump will surgically strike those launch sites, and not just the one where they're preparing to launch from, but all of the launch sites. If I were the commander-in-chief, I would do two things. That, which would be a surgical airstrike on the launch sites, and also the regime change simultaneously, and just clear the boards completely. That's my approach to it. I don't think we'll see another test. I really don't.
You see, it's great to kind of think about this from all the different angles, and it's China I really am the most interested in, Tony, because I think there's strings attached to North Korea. He's one of their puppets. Whether he's telling them or whether they're telling him directly to go full ahead with these tests or not, I'm not too sure, but they must be seriously worried about the situation where Little Kim is taken out and then you've got some kind of Western puppet put in there, because then that's going to be almost like a beachhead for the US right up against the Chinese border.
Well, let's go to history a little bit, because there's been an awful lot of talk about sanctions. And if you define sanctions, and if you look at the imperialistic attitude of Japan prior to World War II, prior to Pearl Harbor, the United States cut off Japan from raw materials, including gasoline, including oil, refined gasoline products, oil products. And Japan doesn't have its own natural oil reserves and refineries, certainly not prior to Pearl Harbor. I am not making excuses for the Japanese. I'm just setting the context in which Pearl Harbor took place. And that was because the United States put an embargo. Today, we call them sanctions, but put an embargo on Japan. And Japan, lashed out, because they viewed the United States as an imperial power. Now, you can say the same thing about North Korea and their attitude towards us. Now, they're not going to be able to pull off a Pearl Harbor, but that, I think, explains a lot of the bluster coming out of Kim. But you don't hear any of the analysts making that connection, or that comparison, I should say, between Japan prior to Pearl Harbor.
We need to get that mad cat Dennis Rodman on the show, Tony. He hangs out with Little Kim 6-7 times a year. Says he plays basketball with them, going skiing. I mean, that's a crazy kind of friendship going on right there, isn't it?
Didn't you call Little Kim on our last show on Monday the ball with arms?
Johnny whistles. He takes full credit for the beach ball with arms.
The beach ball with arms. Okay, yeah, we got to lighten the mood up a little bit. But yeah, it's just not going to happen. I'm not worried about North Korea. Okay, I really am not. It's not an issue. We need to pay attention to China.
You think that's the ones that are going to rise up, Tony? Is that the main enemy in town? And I see your point about Russia and the US being allies. They would actually make natural allies, if you ask me. And both countries would probably prosper because you look at the resources in Russia and the size of the place, they could definitely take advantage of some of the machinery and the kind of manpower and just a natural kind of business partnership there with the US. But China, they are kind of the almost rising power. We see so much coming from there. And is it, in your opinion, then, that they're the ones to watch?
I think so. Monday I said we need to keep an eye on, Israel being the timepiece according to biblical scripture, and I laid that scenario out. But China needs to be watched because they have an over 200 million man standing army, the largest army in the world. And when you look at biblical scripture and the war of Gog and Magog, that's not just Russia, that includes China at some point. But this is at least 7 years out from here. We're talking Armageddon, the battle in the Valley of Megiddo, in which China and Russia join forces against Israel. But right now, we need to watch China and Israel. China, because of their military, but also their economic stranglehold over the United States, because they are the largest holders of U.S. debt, specifically Treasury bills, T-bills. And that, is how basically our government is continuing to operate, is because we sell our debt on the worldwide market. China has purchased the majority of that. And the only reason that we're able to continue to function is because we're able to sell that debt to finance ongoing governmental operations.
China, one thing, the kind of woo that sticks out from China, and it can tie into what we're talking about here, is these massive ghost cities that they've got there. I came across these years ago when I started looking at all this alternative information. And for people who haven't checked these out, just go to Google, YouTube, and ghost cities in China. And these are literally massive, sprawling metropolises all ready to go, only they have no people living there. Now, I was looking today, Tony, and there's a population, they say, of 25 million in North Korea. Now, if the worst came to the worst and that place did collapse for whatever reason with everything going on right now, and these people were desperate and flooding across the Chinese border, horrible speculative scenario, but that brings the ghost cities into play then.
It does. Along with the ghost cities, I think people economically need to also be aware of the fact that China is the largest holder of physical gold in the world. And in the United States, they purchased a lot of the gold mining operations in the U.S. as well as around the world. My last figures that I had, they were purchasing something like 850 metric tons of gold every month. They want to set up the worldwide currency. They are trying to push the yuan as the petrodollar replacement currency. And we've talked about the BRICS off the air, the BRICS nations, but China really wants to be the one that is going to dictate the economic conditions, which also involve the clearance houses for debt. If you want to sell debt, you want to sell portfolios of debt, A, B, C, and D rated packages of debt here in the United States and others around the world. You have to have a clearinghouse for those debt products, and that's what they want to control. The big thing that's looming out there, besides the control of the world's gold, because the one they want to set up as a gold-backed currency, is the derivatives market. The derivatives market is something a lot of the media tends not to talk about. again, my last figures, there was something like $400 trillion in derivative debt that if that ever collapsed, it doesn't matter what China has in terms of gold. There will be no economy in this world. That's the big reset button scenario, is derivative collapse.
You know, we always hear about these derivatives, and when you start looking into these things, talk about funny money and funny, shady deals. But you mentioned gold there, Tony, right? You know me, I'm conspiratorial, Kevin. You're in the US right now, and there's a conspiracy, right, that Fort Knox, the place where the US keeps all of its gold, there's none there. And a few years ago, we seen Germany. They tried to repatriate their gold from the US, and they were told they would need to wait a number of years for this. Now, are we literally talking about the US having no gold, Tony?
That is absolutely correct. The Chinese have all of the U.S. physical gold. And that's why if you're out there buying gold or silver even, you need to take delivery of the physical metal because your gold and silver certificates are worthless.
That's crazy. Crazy times, isn't it? I mean, Fort Knox, you'd think of that place being laden with the stuff. And then we're coming up close to the anniversary of 9/11 as well. A lot of gold stolen from under the World Trade Center that day. You know me, Tony, full of conspiracies, me.
Well, and there were a number of jewelry exchanges below the World Trade Centers that were looted of all of their gems. Firefighters testified to that.
You know, the shady trading going on in the hours before the attacks as well. It's kind of shady all over. And on 9/11, we're actually going to be joined by Dr. Eric Karlstrom for a 9/11 special. The doc, he doesn't just look into targeted individuals. When he started out, he was very, very heavy into the 9/11 research, and I can't wait to get into that stuff with the doc because he's got such a unique way of looking at things and presenting things, and he does so much deep research, Tony. He's the only guy I know that probably goes as deep as you into the research.
Yeah, well, that's great. I love his research. I love what he does. I mean, he's very articulate in how he presents it as well. He will be, of course, I'm sure, sidetracked a little bit about the storm because Irma, if it does track up the eastern seaboard, on the 10th, it is due to make landfall in New York. So on 9/11, we're going to have to see if New York is going to be flooded or not, because that's the scenario. The last I heard was you would enter New York with a forward progressive speed of 20 miles an hour and sustained winds of at least 100 miles an hour. Doesn't mean it's going to be a Cat 5, but 100-mile-an-hour winds and driving the storm surge probably 10 feet or more ahead of it, and then pushing it up into the bays and into the rivers. That's where the damage really comes from, is the storm surge. 100-mile-an-hour winds, most structures can do pretty well to tolerate that, but you can't tolerate being flooded with 10 feet of water.
And that was the same with Katrina, I believe. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was a Cat 3 when it finally hit. But it was the flooding that it brought with it, this kind of storm surge. That's where the real problem arose from. And some of the tracks I've been looking at, Tony, some have got it going into the Gulf of Mexico, some smack bang into Miami, and then some up the eastern seaboard. I mean, where do you think the likelihood is? What do you think is going to happen with this?
Well, given that I think, Dane Wigington has made a credible case for saying that this is engineered, I think it'll go up the eastern seaboard. If you look at the models that show this thing making a right turn, and it's nearly a right angle right turn, that's pretty indicative of being steered, because what they do is they dip the jet stream down south far enough that it continues to grab and pull the storm up the eastern seaboard while there's a high pressure cell sitting offshore in the Atlantic to define the corridor that would trap that storm track right along the eastern seaboard. So I see it, weakening. Like you said, Katrina was a week 3 as it came ashore. We're probably looking, by the time it gets to New York, maybe a 1, maybe a tropical storm, but still it'll have a pretty good punch to it by the time it gets there.
Absolutely. And as I've been keeping on telling people, our very own Scott Lopez from Freaky Friday doing some really bang-up work over on Facebook with daily updates on this. And today's video, I noticed this Hurricane Jose that's coming in behind it. And it is making kind of strange turns as well out in the actual Atlantic, Tony. And Scott points to this, and it makes an erratic kind of turn up to the northwest and then comes back on itself. It's almost like it loops back on itself, and it doesn't seem like a very natural path to be taken. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, same thing happened in Texas. I mean, it just parked and sat over San Antonio and kind of made a small loop and went back offshore and gathered energy and then took off back up towards Houston, and then eventually inland it hit into Louisiana. These are things that even the weather people openly are saying they've never seen a track like that. They've never seen a hurricane park itself for 4 days over land and then go back out to sea. So these erratic moves, including, this right angle turn by Irma that's projected when it's over Florida, these are not natural. I mean, anyway, we'll get there after the break.
Join us after the break.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, everyone. Moving into hour number 2 already here on the Kev Baker Show on Truth Frequency Radio, TFRlive.com. I would normally say I hope you are enjoying the show tonight, but the topics we are covering are amongst the most serious because we have this Hurricane Irma that is destructively on its way, making its way to the US mainland. We've been discussing that. We've been discussing Little Kim, North Korea as well. And now, like I was saying earlier on in the show, we've got a kind of family chat here at TFR on Skype, some great information coming in. And this is very, very important indeed, because the other night, Tony, when we were talking about Hurricane Harvey, in the conversation, the topic of nuclear power plants came up. And there's an article that's been posted, and it's from the Miami Herald, and it's just from today. And it says here that 2 South Florida nuclear power plants lie in Irma's path. Are they ready? Now, it says in the article here that the big stacks that we're all used to seeing, one of these 400-foot smokestacks for the oil-burning power plant, it can actually, they say it can take a 235 mile per hour wind. But you were telling me that some of the kind of reports are saying that the maximum gusts or the potential gusts we're seeing with Irma are just 10 miles an hour short of that at 225.
Yeah, and those are just estimates, so we're not sure. And, it isn't so much the cooling towers that we need to be concerned about, although that, if they lost the cooling towers, that can certainly drop debris into not the reactor core itself, but just into the general steam turbine apparatus that's below that. The reason for the cooling towers is to cool the water that is circulated around the control rods. Now, what they will do is insert control rods into the reactor itself to slow the reaction and thereby control the temperature of the radiation that is produced, that then heats up water that is passed through a heat exchangers, just a series of tubes that get heated up by the water that surrounds them. And then those tubes carry the water to the steam turbines, and that generates the electricity. But it is imperative that the circulating pumps continue to receive electricity. Now, if the grid goes down, there are backup generators. But as we learned with Fukushima, those backup generators in Japan were at ground level, and they were quickly overwhelmed by the flooding from the tsunami. And that's what led to the cores melting down. Hopefully, these generators are in a position where they will not suffer the ill effects of the storm that's heading its way.
And it's like I was saying to you before, Tony, I mean, it's insanity. These kind of power plants, the way that they build them, you know, almost in the path of these storms sometime. And I've noticed in this article here that FPL, the actual company in charge of this, they've been criticised for that very fact. The fact that they do build them in very vulnerable locations. Now, I appreciate they need them by the coast, but there's surely a lot more coastline that isn't kind of susceptible to hurricanes and things like that, where it would make more common sense to put them in the first place, right?
Yeah, I can't say what are all the criteria they use for, locating a power plant, because obviously you want it to be as close to the end customer as possible, so you're not pumping electricity through transmission lines for long distance and suffering the line loss that occurs due to the natural resistance of the power transmission lines. Whether they're copper or they're made of aluminum, you still have a loss over a distance. But I would say you would want to put them along inland waterways like rivers rather than on coastal areas, because virtually any coastal area in the United States, let's focus on, is subject to storms. Even the Pacific is subject to storms. Now, San Onofre nuclear power plant down in Southern California, they've not had any issues with storms, but it sits on an earthquake fault, and it's virtually built on the beach on a active fault zone. So you got to question their research when it comes to locating these things. But yeah, it's because they can bring cooling water in from the ocean and use that in this heat exchange cooling scenario. A lot of plants will use cooling ponds. They'll have 70, 80, 100 acre cooling ponds that they'll use instead of bringing water in from the ocean, and they'll circulate the water through the cooling ponds. Those are oftentimes used because they don't have the ability to erect cooling towers, usually because of zoning issues with the local communities. Sometimes it's a matter of just economics. It's cheaper to use a cooling pond than it is a tower. At any rate, putting them on the coastlines that are subject to hurricanes really is just asking for trouble.
And, like you were saying just a moment ago, let's hope, fingers crossed, that when Fukushima did occur, and that's still ongoing just now, but let's just hope that, these aren't unintelligent people. Let's hope they learned a lesson from that, and it was industry-wide. We really do, because with these two power plants in the way of this storm and the surge that's coming that way, one only has to wonder what might happen if they haven't learned those lessons. Now then, Tony, we're going to get back into the kind of stuff that we're more renowned for, the science, the technology. However, if any more big kind of breaking news comes on the storm, we will bring it to you. And I'm a lover of all things quantum, right? And you sent an article today, and this is all about how quantum computing is about to be revolutionized, Tony. What's going on here?
Well, let's make that a teaser. Let's go back to storm topic just for a second. But let's go above 30,000 feet. Let's go to the sun. Let's talk about that breaking story today.
Oh, that is so correct. And I apologize for forgetting about that, because the sun, it's been playing up today as well, hasn't it? Because it gave off a massive X-band flare. And I believe this was something like an X9 flare, Tony. Is that right?
Yeah, 9.3, almost a 10. Now, the guy that gets all excited on YouTube that we always make fun of and who over-exaggerates things, he was saying that it was a 10. Well, it was a 9.3, and I sent you the data site on all of the satellite monitors and their raw data streams. So we could see that it was actually a 9.3. But that is significant. An X flare, Earth-facing, will produce higher X-rays and gamma rays in streams of accelerated particles such as protons and electrons, in particular the protons, bombarding our magnetosphere and plasmasphere. And we have seen, that our shields, the magnetosphere, really have taken a beating from the sun, and also when CERN is operating, it changes the integrity of those shields. So with an Earth-facing 9.3 X flare, we can expect higher gamma rays, X-rays, certainly UV rays, which have already been off the scale, already have been, heavy and obviously detectable. You just walk outside and it feels like pinpricks on your skin. So the UV scale is going to go way up. We will probably see, not to the equator, but we will certainly see in the very lower latitudes of the northern hemisphere some spectacular northern lights, some aurora borealis effects. Go ahead, my friend.
Well, if we go back to round about this time of year in 1859, September the 1st into the 2nd, this was one of the very largest geomagnetic storms that they think occurred, because this is when we had something called the Carrington event. Now, this was, at the time, it took out telegraph lines, stuff like that. However, if we had had a strike like that with our technology today, and bear in mind all the satellites, for all the shielding they might have up there, Tony, and then all of the kind of electronics that we have become so reliant on down here on planet Earth, this would have catastrophic events, right? It would almost be akin to some EMP strike.
A catastrophic Carrington cabal. How's that for a headline?
There we go. That's definitely it. We'll coin that one, right?
There you go. We're always coining something on this corny show that you and I do. But seriously, yes, besides the aurora borealis, we could see an overloading of the grid. Now, people might be more familiar with the blackout that occurred in New York City that initiated its etiology, if you will, was in Canada. And there was a cascading effect of an overload on the grid that went all the way down most of the eastern seaboard of the United States. So the poor eastern seaboard, you've got coming up from the south, you've got Irma, and coming from the north, if you will, so to speak, you've got this potential power grid of, impact of these X-level Earth-directed flaring activity coming off of the sun, the sunspot activity.
The question is, though, Tony, why governments around the world, UK, US, why don't they take precautions and protect the grid? I've heard it quoted in the billions of dollars to just do whatever it needs to protect the grid. And when you're talking about governments, that's not exactly a lot of money. So why don't they do it?
Well, this is where we get into our speculation and our, conspiracy theory sort of area. And lots of people that listen to us already know the answer to your question. I don't think that they really care about the average person on the street. I don't think they really care about the populations. So the conspiracy side takes us to the Georgia Guidestones and the reduction in population to 500 million worldwide. So to protect the grid when they want to get rid of people anyway, that's a conspiracy side, but that's my answer.
And it's probably the correct answer after all. And I know my mum tonight up in the north of Scotland, I was informing her today, if she gets a clear sky, 1 in a million chance, she will be able to see this spectacular light show in the sky. And I do remember when I was on military drills up in Norway, it was one of the most breathtaking and spectacular sights that anyone could ever see. And I was treated to that near enough every night, Tony, watching this, just what can only be called a light show. It was just fantastic.
Well, let's do a segue. We need to do a plug. Let's do an infomercial just to warn the audience.
Me and you doing an infomercial? Me and you? It's never been heard of.
No, not very often. You just played an excellent presentation and analysis by Dane Wigington. Dane Wigington will be one of our featured speakers at our upcoming Entangled Magazine presents Full Spectrum Dominance, a Divine Battle Plan. This will be September 16th and 17th. This is a live stream webinar event. We ask you to purchase tickets, $10 per day. That just covers our costs. And we've been going through, quite a bit on the technical side to get this thing bulletproof. But September 16th and 17th, Dane Wigington will be speaking about the latest and greatest information that he has from his research on geoengineering, and certainly that will be including Irma, because we will be hosting this the weekend following entry into New York City, as the scenario that I just played out with Irma traveling up the eastern seaboard. So we'll get the latest information from Dane Wigington. We have David Heavener, a Hollywood producer, will be talking about the media and the propaganda coming out of that and his latest information. All of this is tip of the spear. The topics may sound familiar, but the information will be brand new. We also have Alana Freeland, who, like Dane Wigington, is also doing quite a bit of research in the area of geoengineering, terraforming, the magnetosphere, the chemtrail spraying. She will be speaking about one of her books, which is entitled Full Spectrum Dominance, but more specifically, the space fence and the space fence technology way beyond HAARP. And she will be coming out with a book, I think in January, entitled The Space Fence. She will be giving us her latest and greatest information, tip of the spear. We also have Sid Burns, an engineer, well-known engineer, who has developed what we call the threat matrix. And this is something that Kev and I contributed heavily to, is a threat matrix that covers all of the topics that I'm going to read off in just a moment. But our last featured speaker will be Kathleen Urquhart, who was our guest last Friday, author of Pigtails and Potter's Field. And she will be giving us her analysis from the, let's say, the spiritual side. And we're talking Christian spiritual side, all right? So we've divided up the presentation on the 16th and 17th into Saturday, Sunday. But on Saturday, primarily, we'll be talking about artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, 5G technologies, geoengineering, the media, geomancy. Now, geomancy will be introduced on Saturday, but covered extensively on Sunday. Of course, we'll talk about CERN, quantum computing, international government intelligence, the globalist agenda, Hollywood, and the church itself. Primarily, we'll be talking about the Catholic Church. So we're going to cover a lot of ground, but again, you may think that these are familiar topics, but all of these people, and last but not least, our good friend Clyde Lewis from Ground Zero Radio. He is, I think he has, I'm probably wrong on this, but he probably has something in the, Kev, help me with this. I think he has 22 stations that he is syndicated on across the United States. I believe he's number 2 to coast in that genre. But a huge show. He's been doing this for 25 years. He's a good friend of mine and Kev Baker's. And Clyde Lewis will be speaking to us about the occult foundations of technology. So we're really honored to have Clyde Lewis join us on Saturday. And Kev Baker will be with me. He and I will be co-hosting this event for 2 days. It's 16 hours in total. It's quite a bargain for $10 per day just to cover our costs. Tickets will go on sale Friday. We will make the formal announcement Friday on my show, and tickets will be available then. Thank you, Kev, for the airtime to be able to present that.
No, absolutely. And yeah, Big Clyde, I mean, he's absolutely exploding right now, and I couldn't be more happy for himself, Ron, and the rest of the Ground Zero media team. And like you say, I think it is just second to Coast or something. The whole lineup there that you're talking about, it's going to be a very unique experience indeed. And with myself and yourself to kind of thread things together, Tony, it's just going to be absolutely brilliant. And I urge everyone to check that out. So, time for some science, Tony?
Sure. Go right ahead, my friend.
Absolutely. And, we'll just leave the teaser out there about the quantum, because there's something came up the other day, and we haven't had a chance to talk about this yet, and I'm sure you'll enjoy ripping this apart. But that's the fact that astronomers have announced the discovery of a massive black hole that's right next to the black hole at the center of our own galaxy. Now, they're saying that this black hole, and I emphasize that term there, is 100,000 times bigger than the sun. Now, they are absolutely beside themselves at this discovery, Tony, but I've got a really supermassive problem with black holes, and I know you do too, because I put a video out about this the other day, and I was hammering home the fact that none of this, absolutely none of it, has ever been proven to be correct. It's all theoretical. Never once have they managed to recreate anything like this in lab conditions. However, the same can't be said for another model of the universe which can reproduce all of the amazing, wondrous sights that we see in space. And that is, of course, the electrical model. And when you start factoring in plasma. So, Tony, your thoughts on this discovery of a, air quotes, supermassive black hole near the center of our galaxy?
Well, I think it's an echo chamber because you put a video out, 2 days ago on this?
It is, and that, see, I haven't had a chance to discuss this with you, though. We just shared a quick email, and amongst all the emails, I thought, I'll give Tony a chance to rip apart this absolute kind of fictitious report.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, because you did a really good video on your YouTube channel on this, and I wanted to commend you on that. And thank you as well for allowing me. If people are seeing your videos on my YouTube channel, it isn't because I'm taking them. I'm being allowed to load those onto my channel. I've had a few people email me about that, but yes, I appreciate you, Kev, letting me put your information on my YouTube channel as well. But black holes, yeah. Being repetitive here, folks, but for people who haven't heard it, strictly theoretical, never been reproduced in the laboratory, never been measured, therefore cannot be reproduced in the laboratory. Empirically, they are still theoretical. Now, why do they say they've discovered black holes or measured them or can tell you what the gaseous makeup is or that it's gravity that is responsible for, not allowing even light to escape from a black hole? Pure nonsense. They put it out there because they have to justify the monies that flow to them for their research. If you really ever got one of the retired old physicists or scientists from almost any genre off to the side and confidentially, and he was old enough that he didn't care about really speaking his mind, he would tell you that it's all a scam. I've had those conversations with these guys. It's all about the flow of money, jobs, grant money, the grant mill, supporting all of this research, that it has just a massive, massive machine that supports the military-industrial complex. So they'll continue talking about black holes because they have to justify their jobs and their grant money. This is the same scenario you can lay and overlay onto CERN. Same type of deal. Black holes are not gravitational. We'll get into the science of it. As Kev was saying, the electric model of the universe means simply that the so-called void of space is filled with ionized gas, and that is a conductive medium, meaning electrons can flow through, protons can flow through outer space, the void of space, which they want to keep saying is filled with so-called dark matter and dark energy, to explain the fact that their theories and their associated equations, that the math literally does not add up. So they have to come up with something theoretical and call it black or dark energy and dark matter, and therefore black holes. What pulls together the material that we see as nebula, as stars, as so-called black holes is not gravity, because gravity is 10 to the 39th power weaker than electromagnetism. And therefore, the electric model of the universe better explains the gathering of energy and the coalescing of energy into matter. Has nothing to do with gravity pulling things together and causing this dark black hole that is so dense that light cannot escape. Light cannot escape because it's electromagnetic. It's part of the electromagnetic spectrum, as are gamma rays and X-rays, UV rays, all the things that we talk about here related to our magnetosphere and the sun today. So electromagnetism is nothing more than magnetic lines of force attracting energy and attracting matter together to form very dense clusters. But those clusters are clusters of plasma. They are not black holes. It is the coalescing of plasma from the universe that forms stars. Our own star, the sun, is not a hydrogen bomb, to put it in colloquial terms. It is gathering plasma from the cosmos around it. It is pulling in energy, fuel in the form of ionized gas. That's what powers the sun. This has been proven by my good friend Monty Childs with the Sapphire Project. If you want to see how the sun operates, go look at the Sapphire Project, Monty Childs. They have proven in the laboratory the actual process that is occurring with the sun. So they are now at development level, prototype level 2. The first one, they were putting into their device, it's a plasma chamber. Picture a globe with a catalyst, an iron porous catalyst in the center. And into that iron catalyst, they put in about 1,800 watts of DC power, and they got out about 2 million watts on the outer surface of the globe. It was in training that was containing ionized gas, a plasma. So they have a new form of energy production that they could commercialize. But the point is, folks, this is tapping into the ether scenario of Tesla. And Kev, I'm going to wind this up, let you take over, but there's no such thing as black holes. It's never been proven. Pure nonsense.
All theoretical, and never ever forget it. We'll be back after the break, so don't go anywhere, ladies and gents. One segment to go, right here on KBS with Anthony Patch and myself, Kev Baker. Don't go anywhere.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Moving into the final part of tonight's Kev Baker Show, and it's been another amazing night with Anthony Patch. You can find his work over at anthonypatch.com. And since it is the final segment, Tony, let's get into the stuff that we really are well known or best known for, all the quantum computing kind of stuff. And you sent me a story today that on the face of it, I was starting to get very excited. A new type of quantum computing has been invented, Tony. What's happening here?
I certainly don't think it's new. Let's give them the punchline, and then we'll backfill like we always do. And the punchline is, there's nothing new here, folks. I said to Kev as we led up to this during the break, this is an article that should have come out 15 years ago because it's not going anywhere. They're not telling us anything new. They're claiming they've got a new flip-flop qubit, and yet they haven't even built it. It's only a blueprint. And they're saying that, this could lead to significant advancements in making quantum computing a reality. Well, have you not heard about D-Wave? Have you not listened to the Kev Baker and Anthony Patch shows for the last 3 years?
And here's the thing, Tony, because we often see articles like this, and we were almost laughing at the fact that it almost parrots another company that's working on similar technology in the UK. But one thing we've both noticed is the fact that ever since D-Wave came out and publicly announced that they've got a fully functioning, commercially available 2,000 qubit machine, we've hardly seen any talk about that. Yet you compare that to the likes of IBM when they're playing about with maybe 15 to 30 qubits, and the whole world's going mad over the potential for a quantum computer. but there's already one commercially available with 2,000 qubits, so why don't they talk about it? I think we both know why. It's because they don't want people looking at the D-Wave.
Yeah, and their primary customers are all the intelligence agencies, if you will. We said on the last show that D-Wave, got its initial funding from DARPA. It was $10 million. But, they have sold to Google, to Amazon, to Facebook, to USC, to Lockheed, to Volkswagen, and to Temporal Dynamics. So all of these companies and universities have D-Wave computers, and there's probably some that we're not privy to that have D-Wave computers. And they did, January, February this year, they announced that Volkswagen and Temporal Defense Systems, correct the name, Temporal Defense Systems were customers that had purchased outright the 2,000 qubit, which is actually a chipset known as a 2048, a 2048 qubit set. All of the other customers I just cited received upgrades. For example, Lockheed and USC were the first purchasers of a D-Wave computer, and that was a 128 qubit machine. All of those have received upgrades to the 2048 qubit chipset. Now, the next one that should be coming out, I would expect in January, February of next year, will be the 4096. Now, that may actually come out even earlier than that, but we won't know it publicly. I'm saying publicly around about January, February, the 4096 will come out. But the 4096 is going to be responsible for working with CERN on opening the portal. Now, we don't know exactly when the portal is going to open, but it is the 4096 that will be responsible for controlling the opening of that portal. Now, without getting down that rabbit hole too deep, because we've covered it so much before, I think the reason that there's not a lot of mainstream media press and even magazines like Wired magazine don't really talk about D-Wave too much. They've done articles in the past in some of those, popular science type magazines in that genre. But I believe the reason we don't see a lot of popular attention to D-Wave is because of their customer base. And their customers don't really want the public to know what they're using, whether it's the intelligence agencies or Google. But anytime you hear about Facebook and Google, even Amazon, talking about AI and the implementation of AI in their business models and their business operations, that is the D-Wave computer. Go ahead.
No, absolutely. And like we were saying here, back to this article, they're saying they've come up with a new way of quantum computing. And just to read a bit of this here, it says Australian researchers have designed a new type of qubit, the building block of quantum computers. They say that will finally make possible to manufacture a true large-scale quantum computer. Cough. Broadly speaking, there are currently a number of ways to make a quantum computer. Some take up less space, but tend to be incredibly complex. Others are simpler, but if you want to scale it up, you're going to need to knock down a few walls. Some tried and true ways to capture a qubit are to use standard atom taming technology, such as ion traps and optical tweezers that can hold on to particles long enough for their quantum states to be analysed. Others use circuits made of superconducting materials to detect quantum superpositions within the insanely slippery electrical currents. The advantage of these kinds of systems is their basis in existing techniques and equipment, making them relatively affordable and easy to put together. The cost is space. The technology might do for a relatively small number of qubits, but when you're looking at hundreds or thousands of them linked into a computer, the scale quickly becomes unfeasible. Now, thanks to coding information in both the nucleus and electron of an atom, the new silicon qubit, which has been called a flip-flop qubit, can be controlled by electrical signals instead of magnetic ones. That means it can maintain quantum entanglement across a larger distance than ever before, making it cheaper and easier to build into a scalable computer. And to quote one of the people on the project here, it says, if they're too close or too far apart, the entanglement between quantum bits, which is what makes quantum computers so special, doesn't occur. And that comes from somebody called Guilherme Tosi from the University of New South Wales. And the flip-flop qubit will sit in a sweet spot between those two extremes, offering a true quantum entanglement across a distance of hundreds of nanometers. In other words, this might just be what we've been waiting for to make silicon-based computers scalable. So what do you think to that, Tony?
Well, let's take it apart a little bit. They said that they're going to use electricity instead of magnetism. Well, you cannot have electricity without a magnetic field. And presently, what D-Wave does with their qubits is they do pass electrons through their qubit sets. They're actually two oppositely traveling pathways of electrons, just like at CERN. CERN has two beam lines that move in opposite directions, and they collide. Well, think of that on a qubit scale, which is, it's at the atomic scale. It's not quantum in its scale. The chipset, it's something you can actually hold in your hand, just to give people an idea. But the point here is that they have electrons flowing in opposite directions within the chipset, and they move simultaneously as zeros and ones in superposition. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into that, but it's misleading to say that they're not using magnetism, they're using electricity instead. No, they both operate simultaneously, electricity and magnetic fields. So that's a very misleading aspect. But what I want to get into here, if I may, is that they are talking about also using phosphorus. Now, the reason that that's significant, they say here the flip-flop qubit works by coding information on both the electron and nucleus of a phosphorus atom implanted inside a silicon chip and connected with a pattern of electrodes. The whole thing is then chilled to near absolute zero, same thing that D-Wave does, and bathed in a magnetic field. Yes, you have to have a magnetic field to control the electrons. Let's go back to the phosphorus atom. I broke this news a year ago, perhaps, Kev, where I talked about D-Wave building a 10th model of quantum computer that had the same number of qubits, 65,536 qubits, that were warm and wet qubits, a biological qubit, moving away from having to use gold and niobium, the nuts and bolts metal design, if you will. Those warm and wet qubits are made of phosphorus, same as they're talking about in this article. More specifically, phosphorus, calcium, and oxygen. Now that mimics the tubulin dimers of the human brain, and the tubulin dimers in the brain within a microtubule is 65,536 qubits. So D-Wave has already gone well past anything that they're even theorizing in this article, because they said it's still in the blueprint stage. Well, what they're doing is they're kind of leaking out little hints here of what D-Wave already accomplished with their 10th model. And D-Wave has already gone to the 14th model. Now, if you'd like more information on all of this kind of stuff that I'm talking about and go really deep into it, subscribe to Entangled magazine that Kevin and I have put together with our publishers, Robbie and Earl Spencer from SE Studios. They're doing always a yeoman's job of pulling these things together. And we have the largest magazine issue in September that's already came out September 1st, 142 pages for a $25 a year subscription. This is our 4th issue. The last one was 110 pages. Every issue gets bigger. But I go into, as well as Kev did in the last issue, into quantum computing, into qubits, all of this D-wave discussion, along with a whole host of other topics. So I encourage you, if you really want to get deep into the things that we talk about, and subscribe to Entangled Magazine at anthonypatch.com. Go ahead, my friend.
No, absolutely. And I'll be contributing something this month for the next edition of Entangled as well. So watch this space for that. But Tony, before too long, I mean, this is going to be up to near 5,000 or 1,000 pages every month if it keeps going at this rate, right?
It does grow. I mean, we have Paul and his Alpha team that contributed last month and to the September issue as well. And they put together some incredible insights that I really hope people will take a look at. My tip of the hat to the Alpha team, as they call themselves, that contributed in August and September. Just it takes my breath away. This isn't just Kevin and me writing articles. We have a host of people that contribute to this magazine, and it varies from month to month. And we started in June, and it's really exploded. And this is a venue created not just for Kevin and myself to put forth our research, but for other people that don't ordinarily have a written venue in which to get deep into what they like to present to the public and need an opportunity to do that. And we're providing that opportunity. Laura Maxwell, who is a friend of the show, she's been on with you, Kev, many times, and she's a contributing writer as well. So, you know, folks, this is one way you can really help support what Kev and I are doing, is to subscribe to Entangled Magazine at anthonypatch.com, to also get tip of the spear information at our upcoming conference on the 16th and 17th of September. It's only $10 a day. There's a conference going on that same weekend. It's a prophecy conference. I won't cite it by name, but you can find it. You know what they're charging for their live stream, Kev? Do you have any idea what they're charging for a ticket for their live stream?
Well, I mean, I've said to you before, Tony, I've seen some of them upwards of $80 odd.
$89.
There you go.
For a live stream. I mean, if you want your information to get out to people, make it affordable. All we're trying to do is cover our costs, our time, our energy, our technical costs, our bandwidth, all of that we're just trying to cover, because it's more important we get the information out to as large an audience as we possibly can. If you charge $89 for a live stream, you cut out a lot of people who can't afford that. And that's not right. If you believe in the information that you're putting out as being valuable, important, life-changing information, which our information is, it's just not just the technology on Saturday, but Kathleen Urquhart is going to be featured on Sunday, and she's going to be presenting truly, truly, truly life-changing information. And that's not just hyperbole. We are passionate about the information we're bringing out in this conference. And I believe that the audience is going to be larger after the event, because people are going to be talking about this and going, you need to listen to these people, because you're not hearing it anywhere else. And we're not talking prophecy conference stuff here, folks. Okay? This is hardcore information that you need to have, because we're stepping into the battlefield. We're using the Art of War by Sun Tzu as a framework, as a lattice work to string all these topics together, because we're stepping into the battlefield. Everybody knows these are the last days. I don't care if you're theological or not. Just look at the storms that are coming across the United States now, and the tectonic activity, the solar activity. I'm not fear-mongering. I'm simply saying you can't avoid the evidence anymore that we are in the last days. If you want to know what you can do beyond, buying food and water and all those things that you should be doing, but what can you do for yourself and your families personally? You're going to find out at this conference. One, you're going to get the technical information that you need to know that you don't hear from anybody, and you've not heard on this show with Kev Baker and myself. but brand new technical information that's never been made public will come out from every speaker. And it's a diversified group, from Clyde Lewis, who's a superb researcher, public speaker, and writer in his own right, who puts it out every day on his show, Monday through Friday. A huge variety of research that he does, not just technology, but he'll be talking about the occult origins of technology, and then all the other folks that I talked about. This is a professional cross-section of valuable information, and we'll tie it all together, Kathleen and myself, on Sunday, and we will show you why it is relevant to your personal life. Go ahead, Kev.
No, absolutely. And something that's going to feature in that conference, and something that myself and Tony has labeled an existential threat, is AI. And we started on quantum computers tonight, and it's like salt and pepper. You have to put these things together. When you talk quantum, especially D-Wave, you have to factor in the AI. And every day now, Anthony, it's just story upon story, tens of stories a day about the advancements of AI. And of course, we like to differentiate between the kind of narrow AI or weak AI, the Siri-like one in your phone, or the very kind of specific ones that are never going to take over the world. And then these very strong ones, the wide AI, the general intelligences. And, you know, something that I think that has come out in the media in the past couple of days that's going to play into more of the general intelligence over time with the robot revolution that's upon us. And we like to give the headline first, as you say, and we'll call that a patchism from now on, right, Tony? It says here that the headline reads that Facebook has developed an AI that can react naturally to human expression. And it goes on to say that the Facebook AI lab has developed an animated bot that learned to respond naturally to human facial movements during conversation. So much so that volunteers rated its reactions as natural as a human's. Now, Tony, that's basically the actual headline of the thing, and we're going to build on that from there. But this is nothing new to us or our audience, because we spoke about neural networks in the past. And by now, we're all aware of the fact that if you give one of these AIs and you give it enough raw data to analyze and model from in the first place, whatever task it is, be it X, Y, or Z, within time, and I'm not talking very long, it's going to learn that to the point where it's mastered it, and if possible, even take it to a level that humans wouldn't even believe, because we've no level of thinking like that. That's exactly what we're seeing here. And this is almost like a 2017 version of the Turing test, isn't it?
It is the Turing test, and we covered Alan Turing's 1950 seminal paper on the Turing test, the imitation game it was called, and that's where they borrowed the name imitation game and applied it to the movie about Alan Turing cracking the Enigma code in World War II that the Germans had for communications encryption. But this is like the Turing test of facial recognition by Facebook's AI system, that people were looking at it and they couldn't tell the difference between, you know, the human and the robot facial expressions. But this is kind of, you know, this is just the face on AI, to be really making a pun out of it, Kev, because we know behind the face are the algorithms that are built upon observations of human behavior. So for them to be able to mimic facial expressions is no big deal, because all of the AIs that you hear, whatever level of AI, all has its foundation built upon mathematical algorithms, flowcharts, if you will, of how humans react psychologically, physiologically, anatomically. I mean, they have robots that watch people in warehouses to learn their movements and their flow, their workflow in the warehouse, and they learn that on their own. The AI robots learn that on their own, and once they achieve that, then the robots are deployed out into the warehouse. And once it's proven that they're doing as good a job or even better than the humans are fired. That's the scenario that's going to play out around the world.
No, it really is. And this is a story that came out of the Daily Mail today. It says mankind is at a tipping point as automation and AI begins to replace us in a long and painful process. And, when you think about this really is the way we are going, because we often talk about how governments around the world, to control a populace, they want us dependent on them. And if they can take human jobs, well, where does that leave people that were in those jobs? We're going to be relying on handouts from the government. And that's exactly where they do want us. And with all the technology we're seeing now, Tony, I mean, this isn't round the corner. It's here. Mm-mm. And my friend Musk, who is a bit of a hypocrite at times when you think about it, warning about robot revolutions and writing to the UN about killer robots. And here he is, his Tesla factory, totally populated by the same kind of robots that can be programmed to do anything at all, be it building cars to killing people. And when it comes to these robots taking our jobs, I mean, it's literally here.
It is. I mean, that's a quote from the article. With such advancements, it might be easy to side with Elon Musk's view that AI is a tremendous threat to human life, or at least that we wouldn't get along with smart AI very well. But with other AI Facebook bots already working to help improve users' mental health, boy, that's a deep one. Improve users' mental health. Turn that 180 degrees around, folks. When they say help, improve, no, do a 180 on that. They want to lock you up. They want to declare you as mentally incompetent or insane by what you do on Facebook. But it continues here. It says, it is possible that making robots more like us could help us to help ourselves. No, this is not a benevolent scenario, folks. One more thing I'm going to read to you. Even so, it increasingly looks like we're approaching an era where technology like AI makes robots more like us and more difficult to tell apart from us. The Facebook AI lab has already seen chatbots create their own language. Now, Kevin and I covered that a month ago, creating their own language. While researchers at both the University of Cambridge and Massachusetts Institute of Technology have developed systems that can determine a human's pain level from their facial expressions. Read between the lines, folks. When they put something like humans' pain level from their facial expressions, that's testing. They're testing humans, okay? They observe human behavior. They write the algorithms to mimic it. This is not a good scenario. Elon Musk, yeah, he's raising the alarm, but what he's doing behind the scenes is pushing the solution to the Hegelian dialectic that he's pushing, which is problem, reaction, solution. And his solution is the neural net that he wants to be injected into people that will attach to our neurons, or the actual third strand of DNA that we've talked about for 3 years now, Kev. This is not boding well for humanity, because AI could care less about humans. And on our show, we talked about that on 2001.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to all of you out there tonight. This was Anthony Patch and Kev Baker. Wherever you are, make it TFR and didn't touch that dial.
God bless you all. It happened when this Category 5 hits Florida. It's obvious that the eye is going to track either up the middle, to the west, off to the left, if you will, or to the right on the eastern side, and then continue up the eastern seaboard. But that isn't the big deal. I mean, everybody's focused on the tracking to try to predict where it's going to go, over the course of this entire storm event. But people need to keep in mind that the highest winds are radiating out from the eye to as far as 50 miles in diameter. And then, of course, you have, tropical storm winds beyond that 50 mile, but the hurricane winds themselves extend 50 miles out from a very clearly defined eye. And I shared with you off the air something about that eye. Do you want to cover that?
No, I'm going to let you explain that, Tony, yeah, because this was really interesting. And I'd been saying to you how seeing this from satellite images, it looks utterly amazing. And I don't mean that in a bad way. And then when you were adding to that somebody's experience of actually flying into this, I think this is actually quite critical information. I don't know what it means, but there's something to it.
Yeah, the Weather Channel last night interviewed the flight director from one of the storm chaser aircraft that actually penetrates to the eye of hurricanes. And he was indicating that he had never seen in his years of storm chasing, and I don't mean the guys on the ground. I'm talking about a 4-engine propeller turboprop aircraft. And he described the wall as being a double wall, that there is a concentric circle of walls. So they flew through the first one and then immediately penetrated through a second one into the eye. So they were within a separate ring of a separate wall, and that it was the most clearly defined walls he had ever seen and the tallest. And then he remarked also, that you can clearly see the ocean below and the blue sky above. Truly it's a surreal kind of a setting to be in the eye of a hurricane like that, I would imagine. But again, double.
And I feel, Thierry, the PM was close to tears. And it says that Barbuda is totally demolished. Over 90% of structures and roads have gone. And like I say, we can't confirm that right now. But, Tony, when you see some of these outlying islands and things and you hear about the storm surge that's coming on top of these 185 mile per hour winds, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised if there's more reports like this come in over the hours.
Yeah, it could well be that in these smaller leeward islands that they may have the highest death tolls because of the structures and the relative low elevation of the islands to begin with, that they would literally be overrun. They were talking about with Florida along the shoreline to expect 12-foot tidal surge. And that doesn't even include the winds. That's just the water being pushed by the leading edge of the storm and it piling up on the shoreline 12 feet high. You can imagine what it must be like to literally have the eye overrunning the island itself and carrying first the leading edge and then the trailing edge. And typically the trailing edge is more powerful.
It really is. And I was looking today and trying to find the name of these islands here, but they were explaining how most of the flood surge in the water actually goes to the northwest quadrant. And there's islands up in the northwest they're north of Puerto Rico and Cuba, and they're saying these will be the most affected by this. And they're even saying up to 6 meters of a storm surge. So this is definitely something we're going to have to keep our eye on. But over the course of doing both our shows, Tony, we've had the pleasure of working with some really brilliant researchers. And one of the best when it comes to geoengineering and all things weather has to be our good friend Dane Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.org. And he put out a video regarding Hurricane Irma, and it's entitled Hurricane Irma Manipulation, the Objectives and the Agenda. And what I'm going to do for the audience right now is we're going to sit and we're going to listen to Dane Wigington talking about all of this and going over the historics of geoengineering and weather weapons. Take a listen to this.
Wall eye. This is truly a strange storm.
It really is. And, the TFR family, we've got a Skype chat here. And our very own Phoenix Rising Radio, he sent this update from a French journalist in St. Martin. And they were saying that it's a nightmare. No power, no water, no internet, scenes of looting. We've got boats have sunk, roads closed, a fire in the Mercure Hotel, state buildings and fire building destroyed, and at least 3 dead there. Now, that's unconfirmed, those numbers, but I believe this storm right now, Tony, it's heading for Puerto Rico next. And, if the eye of the storm travels over somewhere like Puerto Rico, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I believe there's a couple of million people live there, I mean, this is going to be a humanitarian crisis waiting to happen.
Yeah, it already is. We never really hear much from the Leeward Islands in terms of reporting. I don't think they want to risk their people, as you had said to me before we came on the air. They don't want to risk their reporters, and I don't blame them. But the eye will travel just north over the islands themselves. So just north of Puerto Rico and then just north of Cuba is the consistency or the combined tracking models that they're putting out right now, with the eye heading straight for the tip of Florida. It's hard to say if it's going to go left or right, like we said a moment ago, but it is almost irrelevant whether the eye goes right over the islands directly itself, because again, we're looking at 50 miles from the eye, and that certainly the eyes will be right along the edge of the islands themselves.
Now, this is going to be a night of breaking news here potentially, but again, coming from Phoenix, and I can't verify this sitting here right now, but this is breaking news, and it's coming from the island of Barbuda. And it's pretty terrible news that this whole island might well have been wiped out. They're saying that 1,000 people may have been killed. This comes from somebody called Lauren Dobson Hughes. It looks like Twitter, by the looks of it, says, hosts acknowledge the PM's statements previously was false, but Barbuda has been, quote, been wiped out.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Kev Baker Show with me, your host, Kev Baker, and I am your host for the next 2 hours of live radio right here on Truth Frequency Radio, TFRlive.com. Big shout out to everyone who's tuned in tonight. Hope you're having a wonderful day, and hopefully myself and my good friend and my special guest tonight, Mr. Anthony Patch, can leave you all the wiser 2 hours from now. Well, that's the plan anyway. And of course, coming up in hour number 2 of the show, we've got our good friend, the man himself, Johnny Whistles. So if you want to check out Anthony Patch's work, you can go to his website over at anthonypatch.com. He's a man that I think really needs no introduction, but if you haven't heard of him before, he's an author, researcher, public speaker, host right here on TFRlive.com. And of course, he has wrote a number of books, including Covert Catastrophe, 2048, Diamonds in the Rough, Revising Reality. He's the man and the brains behind Entangled, E-Magazine. And like I say, he is here with us tonight. So, Tony, again, welcome back, brother.
Always great to be with you, Kev. And we got a lot to cover. We're going to talk about Irma. We have to. That's the big news all around the world today.
It really is, and I would love to be able to talk about something else, but what we're seeing right now with this storm, in my opinion anyway, it's totally unprecedented. I was watching the Twitter feed earlier on. It's a really good way to watch news. As it's breaking, just use the hashtags, look for what's trending, and I tell you, Tony, some of the footage that I was seeing coming in from some of these outlying islands in the British Virgin Islands and places like that, and this was before the eye had even hit, it was utterly horrendous. And to say that this is going to be devastating as it makes its way towards the US, it's a bit of an understatement, Tony, isn't it?
It really is. We don't really know what's going to happen.
Many ask why the government, our own government, would modify the weather in a way that does immense harm to our own citizens and to the life support systems of the planet as a whole. And without doing any investigative research whatsoever, many choose to completely deny that climate modification could be real and ongoing, with many potential objectives and agendas being carried out in what can only be considered programs of weather and biological warfare. The U.S. government and the U.S. military have been fully involved in not just weather modification, but hurricane modification for at least 70 years. Project Cirrus was underway 70 years ago. With only 80 kilograms of dry ice, profound manipulation of a hurricane was achieved. How much more effectively can the weather makers now manipulate hurricanes when they have the air power to dump hundreds of tons of patented materials into such storms? The historical document shown here is for Project Storm Fury, which was historically a part of the ongoing and expanding U.S. government and U.S. military hurricane manipulation programs. One of the crews and aircraft of Project Storm Fury is shown here, a U.S. military hurricane manipulation project and program. It's important to remember that the fully documented weather warfare was already going on by the Vietnam War with Project Popeye, which created catastrophic and continuous flooding over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This document excerpt was taken from a 750-page U.S. Senate report that was produced in 1977. The document's extremely damning and can be reviewed in its entirety on geoengineeringwatch.org by simply searching Geoengineering Watch Massive Senate Document. Geoengineeringwatch.org was the original source that found and posted this report. The yellow highlights in the page excerpts are ours. This document and countless others prove beyond doubt that the U.S. government and U.S. military programs of climate and hurricane manipulation were real, ongoing, and rapidly expanding. This U.S. government document outlining the need for global governance of climate engineering is just one more of many. The active involvement of the U.S. government and military in ongoing climate engineering operations is absolutely undeniable. This is an example of one hurricane suppression patent. And though this information is available to the public,